Oh yeah. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show.
Welcome back to Pizza Film School, everyone. This season, we are exploring the world of AGBO's essential creative partners. These talented individuals work their magic behind the scenes, contributing their expertise to the variety of components involved in creating a film. Today, we're thrilled to introduce a dear friend and a dear collaborator of ours, Dennis Gassner. He's one of the most talented production designers in movie history. I'm going to give you just a sampling of his resume. 1917. Blade Runner 2049, Skyfall, Big Fish, Road to Perdition, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, The Truman Show, The Hudsucker Proxy, Bugsy, Barton Fink, Miller's Crossing, and Field of Dreams. That is just a sampling. Dennis's design has consistently elevated the visual storytelling in every film he's touched. Won an Academy Award for his work on Bugsy, a BAFTA for his work on The Truman Show, and I believe has 6 other Oscar nominations for his work. And of course, we can't forget his contributions to our recent projects that include The Gray Man and the forthcoming The Electric State. It's a privilege and an honor to work with such a visionary artist, someone who truly understands how to breathe life into the worlds that writers and directors imagine. Let's give a very warm welcome to the maestro. Dennis Gassner, welcome. Thank you for being here on Pizza Film School today.
Thank you, Dennis.
It's a privilege to be here. This is great. Thank you. I've been waiting for this my whole life.
Awesome. So now I will introduce our pizza for this episode.
Okay.
This week we have Forever Pie, which is located in West Hollywood here in Los Angeles. They are an all-vegan pizza shop, and today we will be sharing a mushroom and a veggie pie. And then, Joe, we have a proxy dish here filled with garlic knots.
Unfortunately, I can't taste any of it.
Okay.
I do have my own pizza with me today.
All right.
Dennis, will you tell us a little bit? We always start the episodes with your early life, right? Just tell us how you got into design and then how that led to a career in the film business.
Well, I studied at the University of Oregon to be an architect. And in that course of studies, I saw a film called Lawrence of Arabia, and I remember standing up and looking at the screen, the white screen, after everybody had left the theater, and I pointed to it and I said, "Who's the architect of that?" And I said, "That's going to be built bigger than any building that I'm ever going to make." And I packed up my wife and my 6-month-old daughter and moved to Los Angeles and went to film school at the Art Center College of Design that just started a film school, and met a friend, and we had this strange notion that we were going to work on a film. And that film, the first film that we worked on, was Apocalypse Now. We were lucky enough to do a small part in the film that ended up being a little bit more than a small part in a strange way. My job was to design the dossier for the film. There were 7 phases in the film. At the 7th phase, Francis and Richie Marks and Walter Murch brought me into his office and said, "We need to design the dossier which is going to hold the film together." And I said, "Well, what do you want?" And he said, "We want all of Brando's life story as the character." So I started out designing his driver's license, his passport, and all the way through his whole journey through West Point. And all this was documentation that didn't exist, so I had to design it. And luckily I had graphic design skills, and so I was able to manufacture all this. And then they cut it into the film, and it was amazing to see your work, first time in a film, especially something like that.
That's fascinating, because that sequence in that movie where they review Kurtz's dossier, the character played by Marlon Brando, is really memorable and poignant and vivid and beautifully designed. So when you were creating that sequence, some of the work required actual photographs of Marlon Brando. Yeah. Were you doing mock-ups of that, like drawings, or?
Well, I never had access to Brando. I had only through his agent, and he only provided 6 photographs, black and white photographs. Of course, this is way before Photoshop or anything. And I remember needing to composite these elements together, put him in uniforms and put his face on these uniforms, and And it was a arduous task, needless to say. I don't want to get into the details of it, but it was before computers is hard for anybody to imagine today. But those were what we had to do back then, and create those images.
Now, when you saw the finished film, was that the first time that you saw your design work on a screen?
Correct, yeah.
Amazing.
I asked Francis, the last question I asked him, I said, so who do you want to put for the bylines for all the articles were written for Time, Life, Newsweek, and all that about this character? And he said, well, everybody in the room. And so I said, okay. And so randomly, I just put in all the names, and when the movie was presented, when I saw it at Francis's screening room at his house, these images came up, and I was like, oh my God, this is like scary. It was so scary to me. And then there was a Newsweek article that came up that says, Colonel Kurtz under fire. And the byline was by Dennis Gassner. I just put it in randomly. and they put, the editors just cut it in, not really remembering who I was at that point. The president of the studio was sitting next to Bob Spiota, nudged me, and he said, you've got a bigger credit than Francis.
Oh my gosh.
It was about 14 feet on the screen. It was so huge. I thought it would never work in Hollywood again. I mean, I shrank like a little raisin in my chair.
Dennis, you also designed the poster for the film.
Designed the poster in the same way that it was by default. Nobody else knew how to design a poster, really, and I was a graphic designer, so Francis says, well, Dennis will do it. And that was the first film poster I designed.
So after having these opportunities to do very meaningful design work within this sort of significant movie, and I bet both of those assignments were unexpected when you started the
Absolutely,
job.
yeah.
So how did that lead you to another opportunity?
They folded me into the art department, so I was the fifth person in the art department. Dean Tavares, who was Francis the designer, who'd done all the Godfather films, iconic, masterful designer. He brought me in as his assistant. So I assisted him with Angela Graham, Jim Murakami, and Alex Tavares, the Dean's brother, and so I was the fifth man on the wheel. And I spent 5 years sitting at a round table and listening to stories and learning as much as I could learn. And then at the end of the run of the studio, they kicked me out of the nest and said, go make movies. And so I started out with my first little movie called The Hitcher, with Robert Harmon directing and Rutger Hauer, C. Thomas Howe as main characters, and luckily enough shot by John Seale, the amazing cinematographer from Australia. And I was writing as fast as I could. You know, that's the way it is in this business. You go, you go, you go.
Amazing.
Tell us how you would describe the role or define the role of a production designer for those people out there who maybe don't have as adept an understanding of what goes on behind the scenes in the film business.
Well, the simplest version, I'm the architect of the movie. I basically create the architecture, whatever that entails. And to me, what I learned about through sitting at the round table was what was the emotion that each scene needed. Probably the one that I remember the most was during The Godfather, when Michael was going to do the killing in the Italian restaurant at a gingham table. And I remember asking, so what did you do that was special in that Italian restaurant? And he said, we olive oiled all the tables. So there was a smell of olive oil in that set. So you walked into that set and you were in that set.
Wow.
That was what it took to really be exceptional, masterful production designers, where you thought about all of those aspects of it. My example of this was in a movie called Field of Dreams. There was a set that I had to do for Burt Lancaster. He played a doctor. We made a little doctor set on location, and I said to Nancy Haig, my decorator, I said, Nancy, run down to the little pharmacy and get me some cotton balls and some rubbing alcohol. And she said, why? I said, just run down and get it. Please, please run down. So she comes back, and we had the set all done. It was a desk, 2 chairs across from the doctor's chair, as you would in a doctor's office. And we took rubbing alcohol and cotton balls and put them all behind all the photographs and images so that you couldn't see it. The director, Phil Robinson, said, just invite Bert to come up and take a look at it. And so he came up and looked at it and he goes, how did you find this doctor's office, this period doctor's office? And I said, well, we made it. And he says, you made this? And he went to the doctor's chair and sat down, and the two chairs across from him, he said, you sit here. I'm going to sit and tell you all the stories of all the major sets that I've ever worked with. And he sat and told us all these stories of the coolest sets that he'd ever worked on. He says, this is so cool because it's in the room. And I said, why? And he said, it's the smell.
Amazing. And these are really amazing stories, and I think so illuminating for people to hear, because the way you do your work is you're not just designing for that screen, you're designing also for your collaborators.
That's correct.
And that, I think, is a really amazing part of your process, something that I know that Joe and I really value in our collaborators.
Yeah.
You're thinking about how the actors are going to interact with this
Correct, yeah.
creation of yours. You're thinking about how the director, the cinematographer, etc., all these different people, how your work is inspiring them in their work.
Well, that's part of, luckily, having great mentors. My theory was find the best people you can work with and learn from them. You learn as much as you can from them and have that experience.
I know that mindfulness is a very important part of who you are in your life, and you practice yoga. And how does that intersect with your work, your creative work?
Well, it's about strength. We have to be really strong to be in this business. And physicalness, I'm very, very physical. I was born that way. I played football, at the University of Oregon, and I used that energy. I'm the first one to be at the top of the mountain. By nature, who I am. And so use who you are, whatever your talents are, to create and be involved as much as you can, as long as you can. And I'm 75 now, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah, I think you're in better shape than either Joe or I, so that's off.
Dennis, you've had long-standing collaborations with a couple of directors, but I think the longest of which would have been the Coen brothers.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit how you met the Coen brothers and how you started working with them?
Well, my agent called me and said, the Coen brothers want to meet you. And first I read the script, and the script was Miller's Crossing. And I read the script for the first time, and I put it down. I told my wife, I said, this is really complicated. And she said, well, read it again. So I read it again, and at the end I went, okay, this is really interesting. I says, it's like reading Shakespeare. The first time you read Shakespeare, it's a little complicated because it's arcane language. This was old gangster language. And I didn't know, what's the rumpus? I didn't know what all this meant. So I had to kind of try to sort out what it was. And so I was excited about going to meet them, and so I went and met them, and for some reason there was a scene and there was no description, and I was curious about why that they didn't describe that. They described most of the sets. I said, what does Miller's Crossing mean to you guys? And they kind of looked at me quizzically, and they kind of went, well, what do you think? And I said, okay, I'm gonna take a chance right here. I have an idea, which is dangerous. I'm going to describe Miller's Crossing in one word. And they kind of looked at me quizzically. And I said, the word is columns. And Ethan got up and wandered around and came back, sat down, and he looked at me. They both looked at each other, and they looked at me again and went, good. And I said, good, you've got it. And so that was the opening of the door to get into the world And when I went to New Orleans, we shot this in New Orleans of all things because of the weather. And so I told my wife, Amy Ness, who was my location manager at the time, I said, find me a forest. So that's where Miller's Crossing, they're going to take John Turturro. That's where they're going to do it. But also, it was a metaphor for the entire film. So I put a column in every set. Columns, of course, you know, it's all about men and big men trying to one-up each other.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
The process is desperation. A lot of it is just desperation. You have to go deep when you find that there's a problem you can't solve, and you have to collaborate, and that begins the collaboration. That we've already done all this together. You know, we can get to that later, but that was kind of the first time I did that. Quite honestly, I did it with Steven Spielberg on Mademoiselle Geisha, and I've done it with a lot of people that we need to find that door to open. How do you get into it so that there's a comfort zone for all of us? And hopefully this helps young people kind of start to think about where they're going with their careers too, and just gives you a little heads up.
The concepts you were just describing there in your process, I know you were saying you got a lot of that from listening while working with Coppola and et cetera. But was any of that experience rooted in your experiences in architecture school at Oregon or art school?
Absolutely. You know, the first thing that I remember in my first class in architecture school was that you're going to build the biggest building in the world. That's a big thing to imagine. And imagining is, well, I call it imagining or dreaming. You have to be able to open your mind to dream about what the projects are. You're given a bunch of words on a page. What do they really mean? And what's the essence of that? And what's the depth of those things, so that ultimately we're trying to create a project that is competing with a million other films out there, or film ideas anyway, to rise to the surface, and then do the best job you can with the material and the finances that we have to make the films, of course.
How did you first connect to or think you could potentially have a future in creative design, and even choosing to go to architecture school? Because like you mentioned, you're able to play football at University of Oregon. Yeah. Like, where did that part of the creative design part of your experience start to develop when you were young?
Well, that's a great question. I remember when I was at Camera Image in Poland being asked that question, how did you start? And you get a question. So I had to fast track real quickly. It went back to when I was 5. My father and his twin brother were building our family home in Oregon. And I ran up as a eager young boy to help. I said, Daddy, I need a job. What can I do? What can I do? Can I help? And he says, oh, okay, yeah. Here's a little tin cup. If we drop any nails, go pick them up and bring them back to us. And so, and okay, ping. And I ran down in the dirt, and I was under the house, and they're building the framework of the house, and I grabbed a bunch of nails, and I came back up, and I said, Daddy, I've got some nails. He goes, oh, okay, well, hand me one. So I handed him one, and he says, oh, it's bent. One. Ooh, okay. And he says, well, here's a hammer, straighten it. So I bang, 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 and I presented it to him, and he said, it's still bent. Oh, bang, 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 bang. And I handed it to him. He says, oh, good. He takes it from me, and he bangs it into the wood. That's the first time I ever built anything with my father. And then I saw this house evolve over the top of me, and I lived in it. And I used to crawl on the floors and look at all the craftsmanship and the detail. They were amazing men, and felt the energy of the house. And then, went off to my journey, and.
Wow, amazing.
Dennis, when you first start on a project, obviously you read the script. Just walk us through your process as you attack the design on a movie.
It's really about an emotional connection. What is the emotional connection? Do you feel that you can spend a year and a half of your life running as fast as you can to help create the best product that we can, because we're in a business of creating product that is a huge amount of history that we're looking back on. The kind of the example would be the Bond films, when I started the Bond films. So I went down to this address and walked into this room. There was Barbara Broccoli and Mark Forrester, and they kind of looked at me, and I looked at them, and they looked at each other, and they looked back at me, and they go, "You are going to be on a plane with us tomorrow morning to go to Italy." I went, "Okay."
All right.
I mean, that's as simple sometimes as, it is. I mean, it's a strange story.
Yeah. Getting on a plane together to go to Italy sounds like a good start.
It's a good start, yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things where you just have to sometimes trust the serendipity.
Your process is very similar to what you've been describing. You would sort of present Joe and I, we talk, a lot of listening and talking, and then you would present Joe and I sometimes with an idea or an image or a sort of design concept, and then sort of saying, what about that? Can you use this? And I always really appreciated the way you offer creative ideas in sort of this very open way of like, here's something I find interesting to what we're trying to do here. Do you also? But I wanted to go and ask you about it because your process seems to be very interior, very sensitive, very focused. But I remember when Joe and I were first making Captain America: Winter Soldier, and we had never made a movie of that scale before. It's by far the highest budget film we'd ever done. And we were having some trouble wrangling the budget. And the line producer, Michael Grillo, called us in one day to his office and said, as we were trying to rustle the budget, he goes, "I just want you to understand how a movie like this works." He's like, look at the art department. There is a massive, massive portion of our budget in the art department. That's how it works. And it was the first time I started to understand on a literal level how big your section of the movie is, especially on large films that are doing a lot of construction, a lot of location work, etc. You are sort of running a department that is comprised of a large amount of people doing very many different jobs, a lot of money flowing through the department. How do you manage the scale of that kind of endeavor with a more sensitive and calm and focused creative process?
Well, if you let everybody be part of it, they understand, so you empower them so that they can make the best decisions every day that they can make. It's not like, oh, well, we'll just do it this way. They're already empowered. And so I talk to everybody a lot. I move around. I use my energy to move around all the departments and talk to all the people and look at all the details and say, okay, you see this fork here? You see, is that the best fork that we have? If not, let's find the best one. The process is making sure that everybody's informed. If they're informed, then you have the best process in the world.
Let's talk a little bit about some scenes from The Gray Man. So we just go through them specifically, and you can talk about the process of designing the scene, the storytelling behind it, the motivation behind the choices. The first scene we're going to talk about is the nightclub that opens the film.
We're introduced to the title character, the Gray Man, and Ana de Armas, the other lead in the film as well. The scene is set in Bangkok, and we were intending to go to Bangkok for this scene early on. That was the plan. And as the COVID situation remained complicated and movement between countries remained complicated and other budgetary issues, etc., eventually we bailed on the idea of physically going main unit to Bangkok. So I always thought that was an interesting jumping off point for you to sort of pick up the problem at that point.
You learn something from everybody you work with. When I was doing the Truman Show with Peter Weir, I'd found this little village in the panhandle of Florida that I thought could work really well for the film, and I invited him to come look at it. He looked at it, and so we spent 2 weeks, just him and I. It was off season. It's basically a resort community that people buy homes and come for the weekends and so on. So we had a lot of time by ourselves riding bicycles around this place. And at dinner one night, we were talking, and I said, "So Peter, how do you think about movies. When you get a movie, what's your first process? And he said, it's always the music. I said, oh, that's interesting. So how does that manifest itself? What is your process? And he goes, well, it's pretty simple. You invite a bunch of people into a dark room and you have to wake them up. And I said, well, how do you wake them up? And he goes, I always use Beethoven's Fifth. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. So you wake them up and then you play with them. It's that development that kind of hit me with Gray Man. And I said, well, it has to be a strong, strong visual thing. And a lot of my movies are very quiet by nature. They have to be, because I always look at things in layers. So the most important thing is the story. Secondarily is the actors presenting the story. And thirdly is the environment and the lighting, how that works. So those layers have to be balanced, so there's no competition. If I'm pushing too hard in front of the actors with the sets, the colors, and so on, then that becomes complicated, and the vibrational, the screen vibration is chaotic. But I knew that we needed to have strength, in the opening of this film. And so that's kind of where color all of a sudden became part of it. I remember Joe and I were walking one day, we were down at the old stages in Long Beach, and I said, I had this idea about the Gray Man, and I just wanted to pass it by you. I don't know what you think, maybe I'm crazy or not, but why don't we just steal from me? Let's use combination of a James Bond film and Blade Runner. And I remember Joe goes, yeah, let's do that.
There are strong color choices in the nightclub sequence, right? And what does color mean to you in that sequence?
Well, you start with the architecture first. It's generally a shape. It's going to be, square or circle or a rectangle, or a triangle. Or it's primary. It's always primary. And then you start to shave off of that. Remember when listening to stories, in Coppola's world, is that Frank Lloyd Wright's mother, when Frank Lloyd Wright was born, created just with plain wooden blocks, a mobile to fit over his crib. And it was a square, it was a triangle, and a circle. So those impressions were so strong with him, and of course one of the greatest architects of the world. Process is always about impressions, expressions that get inside you, and they're going to never leave. So you always start to bring those back out. What is the emotional things that is needed at the time? How do we all of a sudden get the personal world into the architectural world? So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
No, it totally answers the question. I mean, I think all these questions are complicated, and your process is very complicated. You can see it on screen. It's so rich and thoughtful. Anthony, I always say that the key collaborators that we work with on our film are are storytelling with us. We're working in conjunction with each other to tell the best story possible. And we have found that working with you over and over again, Dennis, that what you bring to our filmmaking process is unlike anyone we've ever worked with before, just from a level of detail and thoughtfulness and evoking character identity and character motivation through the architecture. One scene in particular, one setting, one location, it was really intrinsic to the character that inhabited it was Laszlo's apartment. Let's talk about that for a minute. What were your influences for that apartment, this character, this eccentric character of Laszlo?
A big part of a project, especially on a scale like this, on these large-scale films, is research. So you're constantly looking for how we're going to go about the process of creating, again, an eccentric character who can do so many different things, and you know, also is slightly crazy. The Unterwasser world came up to us. I remember seeing some research photographs of in Vienna, and sometimes you just look at it and go, this has to be in the movie.
It was such a strong set for many reasons, but especially, you know, Ryan Gosling's character, as he enters the space, he's immediately apprehensive about this character and where he is. And there was something about the environment that created that sense of unease, the slight warping that you're describing, the sort of colored glass windows that provide light but no visibility, and sort of a distorted version of light. It was so interesting on that level and textured.
It was a spider's web.
Yeah, spider's web. Yeah, and you also put very interesting set dressing within that set.
Of course.
Would you talk about set dressing a little bit in terms of how you think about what you pour into a design set?
Well, that's at a long time collaboration with Nancy Haig, who I started with. Once Nancy sees what I'm doing, you know, we in the earlier days we would collaborate on a very, very specific thing, but in later days I just let her just go. We go, you know. She has 2 Academy Awards and 8 nominations. What am I going to tell her? You know? You know? Again, it was the spider's web. I think that was the kind of the general word that I was using there. Was, you know, pull them in, extract the money, get rid of them.
Talk a little bit. Let's talk about the Château at the end. Obviously, the nightclub is a set. Laszlo's is a set. The Château, combination of sets. But, you know, this is a real chateau in Chantilly. And, you know, how did you find it? What drew you to this particular location for that ending set piece?
It was attrition. It was, you know, we'd started in Hungary, I think, and we're trying to find what that would look like, and then ultimately what we could afford, and what availability, and the complications of COVID, and I mean, it was like a very complicated system, which I was extremely happy with what we ended up with. Extremely happy. There was one photograph that I remember I sent you guys. It was one morning. We'd sent a drone, a friend of mine from London, a drone operator, out, and he took this photograph at kind of magic hour at this one particular spot, and I looked at it, and I mean, within a nanosecond I sent it to you guys, and I got back, and I usually get back, wow, amazing. You know?
Yeah.
You need to end the movie strong. You know, that's the audience is going to go away with what basically your ending is. They've gone on a long journey. You've hit a lot of really strong notes, but then you have to, you know, boom, you have to go at the end. You can be really quiet, you can be somber, or you can be elegant, you can be whatever that emotional feeling is at that point. You know, you have to find that space, and that kind of gave everything. It was style, it was content, it was complications, and then of course we couldn't shoot there interior, so we were lucky enough to have the resources to build it. So, and I think it worked out really well. We got to get the best bits.
I remember when you sent us the image of the chateau, and it was, I believe that it was accompanied by a short phrase, something like, "This is it," or "This is our place," and it was very certain.
Yeah, well, it was.
We saw it and we were like,
well,
yes,
we're running out of time.
Yeah,
too.
exactly. That is true. And funny enough is we actually you know, for as many restrictions as COVID sort of presented, I think in some ways at the Château de Chantilly, we benefited in the sense that because it was closed down, because of the pandemic, we actually had more access there than we would have otherwise. Which
well, the grounds and all that. I mean, that was you know. I always look at this way. You look back on it and you went, well, I mean, we got away with it. You know, I have to say it's the fun of the mystery of film, and the mystery why it comes to us, how it comes to us. I have no idea. Sometimes, again, the scientific aspect of it. You know, you keep going until you have no time.
It's an amazing sentiment, Dennis, and we want to thank you for being on the show with us today. One thing we do at the very end of the show is something we call small bites, which is we're going to ask you some rapid fire questions. And you just give us an off the cuff answer as quickly as you can. If you could watch one piece of content for the first time again, what would that be?
I'm just going to go back to Lawrence of Arabia because that's what opened the door for me. It was the scene, it was a combination of the scene when Peter O'Toole goes into the desert for the first time and you see him on a camel with his guide, and the music and the sound and the presence of that. I mean, I remember being kind of pushed back into my chair and kind of the pressure of that emotional push held me in that chair the rest of the movie. I just was pushed into it, and I was like, it was such a powerful thing. And then to see his journey, and I realized that's going to be my journey. That's the journey that I want to go on.
That's an important movie for us as well. If you could give one piece of advice to yourself in your early career, what would that be?
Drink more water.
I like that one. That's a good one. All right.
Dennis, what do you think the most important quality of a production designer is? What's the most essential quality?
Being open and have fun.
Nice. This is a hard question for someone like yourself who has done so much amazing work, but is there a genre that you have yet to work in that you would like to?
Space.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Tom Cruise is going up there if you want to join him.
Oh, good.
Last question. This might be my favorite. If you had to live on one of your sets, which one would you choose?
Well, being here right now in this set.
That's a lesson from the master.
Thank you again, sir, for joining us today. We're humbled.
This has been really fun. It's been really fun. It's my first adventure back from Hawaii, and sitting at the round table with you guys is always a privilege.
By the way, we're so excited. We're currently working on a movie together, The Electric State, that is something we're all very excited about. So
good.
We'll continue to evolve that film together.
Yeah, good.
Much love. Mangia bene, everybody. See you next time on Pizza Film School.
Okay. Ciao.
Oh, wow, yeah, man, it's Pizza Film School. About to learn about the movies, man. Whoa, it's real cool.